The void of the Arcanis sector tasted like copper and old blood. It was a sensory phantom, of course, a psychic residue projected by the dying telemetry of the Obsidian Sovereign. But to Queen Vera Ardent, it felt real enough to choke on. The bridge of her flagship was usually a cathedral of silence and light. Now, it was a tomb of screaming alarms and flickering emergency strobes. Through the armor-glass viewport, the debris field of what had been 3 escort frigates glittered like crushed diamonds against the black velvet of space. "Report," Vera said. Her voice was not loud, yet it cut through the panic of the bridge crew like a laser through silk. She stood in the center of the command dais, her spine a rigid line of steel. Her skin, usually the pale gold of dawn light, flushed with the subterranean heat of her physiology. The air around her shimmered, a visible distortion of rising temperature that warned her guards to keep their distance. "Engineering is gone, Your Majesty." Lieutenant Cora's voice trembled. The starboard plating buckled. It was not enemy fire. It was an internal rupture. The impulse manifolds just disintegrated. Sabotage. The word did not leave Vira's lips, but it burned in her throat. She looked at the tactical display. The enemy fleet, a ragged collection of mercenary scavengers who should have been terrified of a royal dreadnought, was circling like sharks, sensing blood in the water. They knew. Someone had told them the Sovereign was crippled before the first shot was fired. "Get us out of here," Vira commanded. "Emergency jump. Now." "But the drive is unstable. If we jump, we might. If we stay, we die," Vira snapped, her eyes flaring with an amber luminescence. "Jump." The universe twisted. Stars stretched into infinite white lines, and the sickening lurch of hyperspace slammed into them. The scream of tearing metal vibrated through the deck plates, a mournful song of a ship being pushed beyond its limits. Then, silence. They had escaped, but they were bleeding. 2 days later, the royal court of the Ardent Empire felt more dangerous than the battlefield. The air in the Grand Senate Hall was scrubbed cool, maintained at a temperature comfortable for the mammalian ambassadors but chilly for the draconian nobility. Vera sat on the sun throne, a massive seat carved from a single piece of volcanic glass, and watched the sharks circling in dry land. "We must respond with overwhelming force." "Majesty," Regent Cale Voss paced before the throne. He was a handsome man in the way a viper is beautiful, sleek, polished, and deadly. He wore the heavy brocade robes of his office with an ease that suggested he expected to wear the crown itself one day. "These attacks are not accidents," Voss continued, turning to the Senate. "They are a test of our resolve. The Outer Rim smells weakness. If Her Majesty continues to hesitate, if she continues to retreat as she did in the Arcanis sector, we invite invasion. We need a necessary war to remind the galaxy who owns the stars." Vira gripped the armrests of her throne. The stone grew warm beneath her fingers. Voss was rewriting history in real time. He was painting her survival instinct as cowardice, her tactical retreat as a rout. "I did not retreat, Regent," Vera said, her voice dropping an octave, resonating with the sub-bass growl of her ancestors. "I preserved the flagship, and the failure of the manifolds was not enemy action. It was a maintenance oversight." "Or perhaps," Voss said, smiling with teeth that were too white, too perfect, "it is a sign that the Queen is distracted, unstable. We hear rumors, Majesty. Rumors that your heat cycle is becoming erratic, that your judgment is clouded by personal grief." The Senate murmured. The sound was like the rustling of dry leaves. Vira saw the trap closing. If she stayed, Voss would engineer another accident, perhaps one that would kill her. If she fought him openly without proof, He would declare her mad and unfit to rule. He had isolated her generals, bribed her admirals, and now he was coming for her reputation. She needed to leave, not to flee, but to sharpen her claws. "I will retire to the meditative chambers," Vera announced, standing up. The heat radiating from her body was sudden and intense, forcing Voss to take a hasty step back. "Do not disturb me for 3 standard days." She swept out of the hall, her crimson robes trailing like liquid fire. But she did not go to her chambers. She went to the hangar bay. The ship she chose was not a royal shuttle, but a nondescript long-range courier vessel registered to a shell corporation. Standing by the ramp was Captain Suri, the only member of the Royal Guard Vyra still trusted. Suri was small for a draconian, lacking the imposing height of the royal bloodline. But she was fast and loyal to a fault. "The heat-dampening cloak is ready." "Majesty," Suri said, handing Vera a heavy garment woven from sensor-absorbent weave. "It will mask your thermal signature. To any scanner, you will read as a standard humanoid, but it will be uncomfortable." "Discomfort is preferable to death," Vyra said, pulling the hood over her head. The fabric felt cold and heavy, suffocating her natural radiance. She felt small, diminished. "Where are we going?" Suri asked as she strapped herself into the pilot's seat. "The neutral zone," Vera said, staring at the star map. "To the Kestrel workshop." "They say that place is a myth," Suri warned. "A ghost story for desperate captains." "It is real," Vera said. "And it is the only place in the galaxy where money speaks louder than politics." The journey took 4 days of silent running through the shipping lanes of the Rim. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace, the Kestrel workshop hung in the void like a jagged tooth extracted from the mouth of a titan. It was an asteroid, massive and ugly, pitted by eons of cosmic collisions. But looking closer, one could see the surgery. The rock had been hollowed out, laced with docking pylons and exhaust vents that bled blue ion fire into the dark. It was a hive of industry built into the bones of the dead. As they approached, the comm system crackled to life. "Unidentified vessel. You are entering restricted space. State your business or prepare to be atomized." The voice was synthetic, flat, and dripping with artificial boredom. "We seek repairs," Suri transmitted, "and we can pay." "Payment is subjective," the voice drawled. "This is Bolt, Station Logistical Intelligence. My sensors indicate your hyperdrive is leaking radiation and your hull plating is misaligned. You fly like a drunken bird. Docking Bay 7. Do not crash. I just had the floor waxed." The interior of the Kestrel workshop was an assault on the senses. It was a cavernous hollow inside the asteroid, vast enough to house a destroyer. Zero-gravity fields suspended rivers of molten alloy that snaked through the air like glowing red serpents. Drones buzzed around them like fireflies, stitching metal with needles of white-hot plasma. The air smelled of ozone, burnt lubricant, and the metallic tang of recycled oxygen. Vera stepped off her ship, the heavy cloak concealing her face and her form. The gravity here was set to standard galactic norm, heavy for a human, light for her. She moved with a fluid grace that the cloak could not entirely hide. A man was waiting for them. He was a guild master, a squat alien with 4 eyes and skin like wet leather. He squinted at them, his datapad tapping a restless rhythm against his thigh. "Cash up front," the guildmaster grunted. "No credits. Hard currency or raw materials." "We have refined platinum," Vyra said. Her voice was modulated by the mask she wore beneath her hood, stripping it of its royal timbre. "Platinum is good," the guildmaster said. "What do you need?" "A full diagnostic," Vyra said, "and a retrofit." stealth systems, weaponized shielding, and I need it done in silence. No records, no questions. That is the specialty of the house, the alien said. But a retrofit like that? Complex work? Most of my boys use hammers and duct tape. You need an artist. Then give me your best, Vira demanded. The guildmaster hesitated, scratching one of his chins. My best is expensive, and he is difficult. He does not like clients. He barely likes people. I did not come here to make friends, Vera said. Take me to him. They walked through the station, navigating a labyrinth of catwalks and pressure doors. Sparks rained down from overhead gantries like golden snow. The noise was deafening, the roar of furnaces, the clang of impact hammers, the hiss of hydraulics. It was a symphony of creation and destruction. They stopped before a blast door marked with warning symbols in a dozen languages. The guildmaster punched a code, and the door hissed open, revealing a hangar bay that looked more like a dragon's hoard of technology than a workshop. Piles of scavenged tech lay in organized chaos. A dismantled fusion core hummed in the corner, and in the center, suspended by gravity clamps, was the skeletal remains of a racer-class interceptor. He is under there, the guildmaster shouted over the noise of a grinder. Hey, Cole, customer. A figure slid out from under the ship's ribcage on a mechanic's creeper. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag that was already black with grease. He was tall, lean, with messy dark hair that looked like it had been cut with a vibro knife. He wore a stained flight suit with the sleeves rolled up, revealing arms scarred by plasma burns and wrench slips. He looked tired. He looked rough. He looked like he had been expecting doom to walk through his door for a long time. Vera froze. The breath caught in her lungs, hot and painful. The universe narrowed down to a single point. A narrator might have paused here to appreciate the sheer, brutal irony of the moment. The probability was astronomical. The galaxy was a vast, dark ocean containing billions of stars and trillions of souls. The odds of two specific people intersecting at this exact coordinate were effectively zero. Yet here they were. A dragon queen entered a galactic workshop and was shocked to see her human ex-husband there. Ethan Cole looked at the cloaked figures. He squinted, tilting his head slightly. Then, a slow, lopsided smile spread across his face. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Well, he said, his voice raspy, as if he hadn't used it in days. If it isn't the mysterious travelers Bolt warned me about, let me guess. You want a ship that flies invisible and shoots black holes. And you want it by Tuesday. Vera reached up and pulled down her hood. The heat dampeners disengaged, and her presence flooded the room. A sudden spike in temperature. A radiation of regal power. Her golden eyes locked onto his. Ethan did not flinch. He did not gasp. He just leaned back against the hull of the broken ship and crossed his arms. Hello, Your Majesty, he said. The title fell from his lips like a joke he was afraid to lose. You look warm. Ethan, Vira whispered. The name tasted like ash. I go by Cole now, he said breezily. Ethan Cole is dead. Died in a tragic shuttle accident 3 years ago. Very sad. Closed casket. You are alive, Vira said, her voice rising, shaking the air around them. Mostly. Ethan shrugged. I eat. I sleep. I fix broken junk. It is a living. Vira took a step forward. The guildmaster looked between them, his 4 eyes widening, sensing a disaster that had nothing to do with mechanics, and quietly backed out of the room, the door sealing shut behind him. How dare you, Vera hissed, her composure, the iron mask she had worn for years, fractured. A flicker of old hurt, raw and bleeding, broke through. You vanished. You let the galaxy believe you were dead. You let me believe you were dead. I didn't think you would mourn, Ethan said. His tone was light, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the grease rag. Considering how things ended. Vera's hands curled into fists, smoke curling from her fingertips. You stole a Class 1 artifact from the royal vault. You betrayed the crown. I borrowed a paperweight, Ethan corrected. And I left the crown because the crown was trying to strangle me. Or have you forgotten the council meetings? The way they looked at me, like I was a pet that had learned to perform tricks. Flashback shards cut through Vira's mind. The wedding, a political treaty to secure a trade route with the Terran coalition. He was the brilliant engineer, the token human. She was the young princess. It was supposed to be cold. It was supposed to be paper. But he had made her laugh. He had snuck her out to watch meteor showers from the maintenance decks. He had touched her not as a queen, but as a woman, ignoring the heat of her skin that would have burned a lesser man. They had fallen in love in the spaces between the treaties. And then the morning she woke up alone, with the alarm klaxons blaring and the vault open. The scandal had nearly cost her the throne. The humiliation had certainly cost her heart. I should arrest you, Vira said, her voice trembling with restrained power. I should drag you back to the Empire in chains. You could try, Ethan said. He pushed off the ship and walked toward a workbench, picking up a heavy spanner. But this is the Kestrel workshop. Vira, neutral ground, no kings, no queens, just mechanics and metal. Workshop law says everyone is equal here. I am never equal, Vira said, drawing herself up to her full height. I am the matriarch of the ardent bloodline. Kneel. Ethan turned to face her. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering for a second on the curve of her jaw, the fire in her eyes. No, he said softly. The refusal hit her like a physical blow. It infuriated her. And strangely, terrifyingly, it steadied her. He was the only person in the galaxy who had ever said no to her and meant it. Before she could incinerate him or kiss him, and she truly did not know which she intended to do, the air in the hangar bay shifted. A low hum vibrated through the floor plates. Ethan frowned. He tapped the side of his head, where a neural interface jack sat behind his ear. Bolt? Why are the perimeter sensors screaming? Intruder alert. The AI's voice boomed over the speakers, no longer bored but urgent. Docking Bay 7 breached. Hostiles detected. They are bringing the heavy toys. Assassins, Vira realized. They followed us. The blast door groaned as something powerful slammed into it from the other side. Sparks showered down. Ethan moved instantly. The laziness vanished, replaced by a frantic, kinetic energy. He grabbed Vira's arm. Get down! He pulled her behind the bulk of the dismantled interceptor just as the blast door blew inward. 3 figures stormed through the smoke. They were clad in sleek, matte black armor, their faces obscured by sensor domes. In their hands, they carried weapons that hummed with a sickly violet light. Resonators, Vera gasped. Anti-dragon tech. The weapons fired sonic frequencies tuned to disrupt the cellular stability of draconian biology. A single hit would turn her blood into acid. Ethan grabbed a heavy plasma welder from the workbench. He didn't aim at the assassins. He aimed at the fuel line running along the ceiling above the door. Close your eyes, he yelled. He pulled the trigger. The welder spat a lance of blue fire. The fuel line ruptured, spraying volatile gas that ignited instantly. A wall of fire roared into existence, separating them from the assassins. The shockwave knocked the attackers off their feet. Bolt! Ethan screamed. Protocol Zulu, lock it down. Containment protocol initiated, the AI announced. Heavy blast shields slammed down over every exit. The ventilation shafts sealed. The hangar bay became a hermetically sealed box. Ethan dragged Vira deeper into the cover of the workshop, sliding behind a massive generator. They were pressed together in the narrow space. The heat of the fire roared nearby, but the heat radiating from Vira was hotter. They were inches apart. She could smell the grease and the old sweat on him. He could feel the furnace warmth of her skin through her armor. "They found me," Vira said, her voice tight. "Even here." "They didn't just find you," Ethan said, checking the charge on his welder. "They brought resonators." "That's military grade. That's expensive. Someone wants you dead. Vira, really dead." "It is a conspiracy," she admitted, hating the vulnerability in her voice. "My own court." Ethan looked at her. For a moment, the humor was gone. His eyes were dark and serious, the eyes of the man she had married. "Then we have a problem," he said. "Because Bolt just sealed the station. We are trapped in here. Just you, me, and 3 guys who want to turn you into soup." Vira looked at him. The anger flared again, hot and bright, masking the sharper pain of proximity. "This is your fault," she accused irrationally. "If you hadn't stolen the key." "I didn't steal it," Ethan snapped, his voice cracking. "I took it to keep you safe." "Safe? You destroyed my life. I saved your life." The argument echoed in the cramped space, absurdly domestic in the middle of a firefight. Ethan stared at her, his chest heaving. He looked like he wanted to shake her. He looked like he wanted to hold her. "Look," he said, forcing his voice to calm. "We can scream at each other later, right now. I need to know if you can trust me, just for an hour." "Why should I?" Vira demanded. "Because I'm the best engineer in the sector," Ethan said, a ghost of his grin returning. "And because I'm the only one here who doesn't want to kill you." Vera hesitated. She looked at his hands. Hands that had once held hers during state dinners. Hands that were now covered in grime and trembling slightly. "Fine," she said. "But we make a bargain. Name it. You fix my ship. You help me identify who sent these assassins. And in exchange?" "In exchange?" Vira looked him dead in the eye. "In exchange, you give me 10 minutes. Alone. No guards. No titles. You explain why you left. The truth. Ethan. All of it." Ethan swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. The chemistry between them was immediate and dangerous, a visceral pull that defied logic. It was the memory of skin against skin, the phantom weight of a body next to hers in the dark. It was the terrifying realization that despite the betrayal, despite the years, the magnet was still there. 10 minutes, he agreed hoarsely. He reached under the workbench and pulled out a heavy metal locker box. He keyed in a biometric sequence. The lid popped open. Inside, resting on a velvet cushion, was a jagged piece of bone that glowed with an internal amber light. But it wasn't just bone. It had been fused with complex circuitry. Wires weaving through the marrow like silver veins. "The dragon bone key," Vera whispered. "You still have it." "I told you," Ethan said, his voice quiet. "I didn't take it for profit." He looked up at her, and the expression on his face was one of profound sadness. "I took it because it's the only thing that can stop what's coming." Before Vira could ask what he meant, the station's klaxons began to howl again, louder this time. The assassins were cutting through the blast door. "We have to move," Ethan said, slamming the box shut. "Now." Vira nodded, summoning fire to her hands. The reunion was over. The survival began. She ran with him, into the dark belly of the machine, leaving the wreckage of their past behind for the wreckage of their present. The repairs began not with the clang of hammers, but with a song. It was a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to emanate from the very air of the hangar bay. Vera stood on the upper gantry, her arms crossed tight against her chest, watching the man she had sworn to forget rewrite the laws of physics below her. Ethan stood before the scorched flank of her courier vessel, his hands dancing over a holographic interface that floated in the smoky air. Surrounding the ship was a gravity press, a massive ringed device that looked like the ribcage of a mechanical whale. Under Ethan's guidance, the rings spun, generating a localized gravitational field that sang in a frequency just on the edge of hearing. Inside that field, the buckled heavy metal plating of the hull was not being beaten back into shape. It was being persuaded. Vera watched, unwillingly mesmerized, as the crumpled durasteel groaned and flowed like thick syrup, smoothing itself out, the molecular bonds realigning under the pressure of the artificial gravity. It was brilliant. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of reckless, beautiful engineering that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. And then there were the nanites. Ethan gestured with a gloved hand, and a swarm of silver dust rose from a canister, swirling around the hull like a metallic mist. This was scale stitching, a technique forbidden in most core systems due to the risk of gray goo replication. Here, in the lawless dark of the Kestrel workshop, Ethan wielded it like a paintbrush. The nanites dove into the microscopic fractures of the ship's armor, knitting the metal back together atom by atom, leaving the surface stronger than it had been when it left the factory. He brings calm to chaos, Vera thought, the realization stinging like a fresh burn. He always did. When we were married, he would fix the palace heating systems himself because the royal engineers were too afraid to touch them. He would recalibrate the shield generators while humming terrible folk songs. He made the monstrous machinery of the empire feel small, manageable, safe, and then he left, and the chaos came back. Her reverie was broken by the flat, synthesized voice of the station AI. "Observation," Bolt announced, its voice echoing from speakers mounted on the ceiling. "Tension level in Bay 7 is currently rated at 92%. This is higher than the time a Wookiee lost a Dejarik in the canteen." "Bolt, mute the commentary," Ethan said without looking up, his fingers still twitching over the controls. "Negative," Bolt replied. "My programming requires me to optimize workflow efficiency. Current efficiency is compromised by unresolved sexual and homicidal tension. Suggestion: locking bay doors until subjects work it out." The blast doors slammed shut with a definitive thud. "Open the doors, Bolt," Ethan yelled, finally looking up. "I am afraid I cannot do that." "Dave," Bolt paused. "Joke." "I am joking, but seriously, the doors stay shut until angry lizard royalty stops glaring at infamous human grease monkey." Vira gripped the railing of the gantry, her knuckles turning white. "I am not a lizard," she said, her voice dripping with icicles. "I am the sovereign queen of the Ardent Dominion. And if you do not open this door, machine, I will melt your processor core into a decorative paperweight." "Threat noted," Bolt chirped, adding arson to the list of Her Majesty's hobbies. Ethan sighed, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked up at Vera, offering a helpless, apologetic shrug. He creates personality subroutines when he gets bored. Ethan called up to her. "I have tried to delete the sarcasm file, but it keeps regenerating. It is like a digital fungus." Vira walked down the stairs, the heavy fabric of her heat-dampening cloak sweeping the floor. She stopped 3 feet from him. The air between them shimmered, distorting the light. "The ship is stabilizing," she said, keeping her tone strictly professional. "But repairs are not the only thing we discussed." "Right," Ethan said, turning back to the ship, avoiding her gaze. "The bargain. You have the key, Vira said. The dragon bone key. You showed it to me. I did. Why do you have it, Ethan? And do not tell me it is for my protection. That is a vague platitude, and I am too old for fairy tales. Ethan picked up a hydrospanner, weighing it in his hand. He looked at the ship, at the walls, anywhere but at her golden eyes. It is not a simple story. Vira, I have time, she countered. The doors are locked, remember? Ethan dropped the spanner. It clattered loudly on the deck. It is a failsafe, he said. The key. It is not just a relic. It is a component, a cryptographic bridge between the Dragonheart core and a biological interface. The core is a myth, Vira said instantly. A bedtime story about the first fires. It does not exist. It exists, Ethan said, his voice dropping. And it is not a fire. It is a weapon that can rewrite star maps. And someone in your court found it. Vira stared at him. The Dragonheart core. If the legends were true, it was a living artifact, a sentient energy source that had powered the expansion of the ancient draconian empires before disappearing into the void. Who? Vira asked. Who found it? I can't give you a name yet, Ethan said. Not without proof, but I know where the proof is. He walked over to a terminal and pulled up a star chart. He pointed to a swirling nebula of brown and gray dust located 3 parsecs from the station. The graveyard of giants, he said. A debris field from the old Clone Wars. Scavengers pick it clean, but deep in the center, there is a derelict dreadnought. A stealth frigate crashed into it 6 months ago. That frigate was carrying a data cache. And you think this cache proves a conspiracy in my court? I know it does, Ethan said, because I was tracking the signal when the frigate went down. I didn't have a ship fast enough to get to the core of the graveyard before the storms hit. But with your courier vessel patched up, he looked at her, a challenge in his eyes. We can get there, retrieve the cache, get the names. And if it is a trap? Vira asked. Then at least we die together, Ethan said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Just like old times. The vehicle they took was not Vira's ship. It was too large to navigate the dense debris field, but a small 2-person skiff that Ethan had cobbled together from spare parts. It looked like a coffin with engines, scarred and ugly, but it hummed with a powerful predatory engine note. They sat shoulder to shoulder in the cramped cockpit. The proximity was suffocating. Vira could feel the heat radiating from her own body, reflecting off the cockpit glass. And she could feel the coolness of Ethan's arm pressed against hers. Outside, the universe was a chaotic swirl of frozen violence. They were flying through a storm of debris, shattered hulls, frozen propellant, and jagged shards of metal that tumbled through the void. The skiff woven through the garbage, dancing on the edge of collision. You fly aggressively, Vira noted, gripping the safety harness as Ethan threw the skiff into a corkscrew spin to avoid a floating reactor core. I fly efficiently, Ethan corrected, flipping a switch that sent power to the forward deflectors. Aggressive implies emotion. This is just math. You always used math to hide, Vira said softly. You would calculate the trajectory of a falling star to avoid talking about how beautiful it was. And you would burn the star to see what color the flame made, Ethan shot back. Vira stiffened. I am a scientist as well as a queen. Ethan. Curiosity is not a sin. No, Ethan said, glancing at her. But power is a heavy coat to wear. You never knew when to take it off. I took it off for you, she whispered, every night. The silence that followed was louder than the debris bouncing off the hull. Ethan's jaw tightened. He focused on the controls, his hands gripping the yoke until his knuckles were white. "We are here," he said abruptly. Ahead of them, looming out of the dust cloud like a dead god, was the wreckage of a massive dreadnought. Its ribs were exposed to space, vast canyons of twisted metal. Wedged deep inside the chest cavity of the giant ship was a smaller, sleeker vessel, the stealth frigate. Ethan docked the skiff on a patch of stable hull plating. The magnetic clamps engaged with a heavy thud. "Suits on," Ethan said. "No atmosphere out there, and the gravity is wonky." They suited up in silence. Vira's armor was custom-fitted, a sleek crimson shell that accommodated her physiology, venting excess heat through thermal fins on the back. Ethan wore a battered, heavily modified environmental suit that looked like it had been patched with tape and optimism. They cycled the airlock and stepped out into the void. The silence of space was absolute. The only sound was the rasp of their own breathing over the comms and the static hiss of the radiation background. They moved through the broken corridors of the dreadnought, their magnetic boots clanking rhythmically. Vira watched Ethan work. He moved with a confident, reckless grace, swinging across gaps in the floor, hacking door panels with a multi-tool that sparked and spat. He knew this world. He knew the language of broken things. He belongs here, Vira realized with a sudden sharp pang of jealousy. He fit into this universe of scavengers and mechanics in a way he had never fit into the gilded cages of her court. There. He had been a curiosity, a pet human. Here, he was a king in his own right. He looks happy, she thought. Or if not happy, at least free. And that hurt more than the betrayal. The idea that his freedom required her absence. "Watch your step," Ethan's voice crackled in her ear. "Scavenger drones ahead." Vira looked up. Hovering in the darkness of the corridor were 3 drones, spherical and menacing. They were old automated defense units, reactivated and gone feral. Their optical sensors glowed a malevolent red. They screeched, a digital scream over the open radio frequency, and opened fire. Laser bolts slashed through the dark. Vira moved instantly. She didn't need a weapon, she was the weapon. She raised her hand, and the vents on her armor opened. In the vacuum of the ship, fire should have been impossible. But draconian biology did not rely on atmospheric oxygen for combustion. Her body produced its own chemical oxidizer, a hyper-reactive gel that ignited on contact with the air or vacuum. Blue flames erupted from her gauntlets, blue because they were burning hot, burning pure, fed by the internal fury of a queen. The fire lashed out like a whip, cutting through the void. The first drone melted into slag before it could track her. Ethan slid under the spray of laser fire from the second drone. He tossed a small disc onto the floor, a gravity mine. It pulsed once, and the second drone was yanked violently downward, slamming into the deck plates with the force of a falling anvil. The third drone swiveled toward Ethan, its cannon charging. Vira didn't think. She launched herself across the corridor, a blur of crimson armor. She slammed into the drone, her hand gripping its chassis. Heat surged from her palm, turning the metal white-hot in a nanosecond. The drone exploded, blowing outward in a shower of sparks. "Clear," Vira said, breathing hard. "Nice throw," Ethan said, standing up and brushing dust off his suit. "You haven't lost your touch." "You are reckless," she scolded, though her heart was hammering a rhythm that felt dangerously like exhilaration. "You slid directly into the line of fire." "I knew you had the angle," Ethan said simply. The trust in his voice, casual, implicit, floored her. He hadn't hesitated. He assumed she would save him. They reached the stealth frigate. Ethan used a decryption spike to override the airlock. Inside, the emergency power was still flickering. Bodies of the crew floated in the zero gravity, frozen in macabre poses of surprise. Ethan pushed past them, focused on the mission. He located the central server room and jacked his datapad into the terminal. "Got it," he muttered. "The cache is encrypted, but give me a second." There, a hologram flickered to life in the center of the room. The image was grainy, distorted by data rot, but the faces were unmistakable. It was Regent Cale Voss. He was standing in a shadowed room, speaking with a tall, slender figure whose face was obscured by a digital blur. Beside them stood a guild official, the same one who had sabotaged Vyra's ship escorts days ago. "The Queen is stubborn," Voss was saying in the recording. "She will not declare war on the Rim Coalition without a precipitating event. And we make her desperate," the blurred figure replied. The voice was melodic, synthesized and chilling. "Isolate her, break her toys, then when she is alone and afraid, she will light the galaxy on fire to feel safe again." "And the payment?" Voss asked. "The Pale Choir always pays its debts," the figure said. "Once the war starts, the demand for our containment solutions will skyrocket." Ethan froze. The Pale Choir. "What is that?" Vyra asked, staring at the hologram. "Who are they? Mercenaries?" "No. Worse." Ethan tapped the console, freezing the image on the blurred figure. He ran a spectral analysis on the senator's hand, which was visible for a split second. The skin shifted, revealing a glimpse of gray, shifting geometry beneath the human disguise. "That is a shapeshifter," Ethan said grimly, "a changeling from the deep void. The Pale Choir is a Black Ops faction. They don't fight wars, Vyra, they sell them. They manufacture conflicts so they can sell weapons, shields, and peace treaties to both sides. Your regent isn't just a traitor." Ethan looked at her. "He is a customer." Vyra felt a cold rage settle in her stomach. Voss was selling her empire, her people, to alien war profiteers. "We have the evidence," Vyra said. "We take this to the Senate. A red light began to flash on the console. A siren wailed, cutting through the silence of the dead ship. "Trap," Ethan said. The hull of the dreadnought shook. Through the viewport, Vyra saw a transport ship clamp onto the outer hull. It wasn't a scavenger ship. It was a military dropship, painted in the matte gray of the Pale Choir. "They knew we were coming," Ethan said, ripping the data drive from the terminal. The cache was bait. Mercenaries flooded the corridor outside. Vyra could see them on the internal sensors. They were heavy infantry wearing sealed combat suits, and they were carrying familiar weapons. "Resonators," she hissed. "They are ready for a dragon," Ethan said, checking his loadout. He pulled a heavy plasma cutter from his belt. Good thing they aren't ready for a mechanic. They burst out of the server room, running for their lives. The corridor ahead was blocked by a squad of 6 mercenaries. The leader raised a sonic cannon. "Vyra, go high!" Ethan yelled. Vyra didn't question him. She kicked off the bulkhead, utilizing the zero gravity to launch herself toward the ceiling. The sonic blast passed harmlessly beneath her, rippling the air where she had been standing a second ago. Ethan slid across the floor, firing his plasma cutter not at the soldiers, but at the magnetic seal of the floor plating beneath them. The seal broke. The floor vented atmosphere into the sub-level below. 3 mercenaries were sucked down into the dark, their screams cut off by the vacuum. Vyra landed on the remaining 3. She was a whirlwind of fire and gold. She didn't use her flames, too much risk of rupturing the hull, but used her strength, the density of her draconian bones. She shattered a helmet with a backhand blow, kicked another soldier into the wall with enough force to dent the metal. Ethan was behind her, covering her blind spots. He used a localized gravity tether to yank a soldier's aim off center, saving Vyra from a point-blank shot. They moved as a single organism, fire and authority, timing and tricks. It was a dance they hadn't realized they still knew the steps to. They reached the airlock, but the corridor behind them was collapsing. A stray shot had hit a structural support. Metal groaned and sheared. Ethan grabbed Vyra and shoved her into an alcove, pressing his body over hers. "Hold on." The ceiling came down. Debris rained around them, bouncing off Ethan's back, pinging against his helmet. The noise was deafening. For 10 seconds, the world was dust and impact. Ethan pressed her against the bulkhead. His weight was heavy, solid. Through the layers of armor, Vera could feel the thudding of his heart against hers. She looked up. His faceplate was inches from hers. His eyes were wide, adrenaline dilated. She felt safe, in the middle of a collapsing spaceship, hunted by alien mercenaries with a traitor trying to steal her throne. She felt safer in the arms of the man who had broken her heart than she had ever felt in her own palace. The realization terrified her. The rumbling stopped. "You okay?" Ethan gasped, his voice tinny over the comms. "I am intact," Vera said. Her voice sounded breathless, betraying her. "Good," Ethan said. He didn't move away immediately. He held the position for a heartbeat too long. Then, he pushed back, clearing the debris. "Let's get out of here." They scrambled back to the skiff, launching just as the Dreadnought's reactor went critical. A silent blossom of white light expanded behind them, swallowing the evidence, the trap, and the mercenaries. Inside the skiff, the silence was heavy. Then, Ethan started to laugh. It was a jagged, hysterical sound. "Did you see that guy?" he wheezed. "The one you kicked? He flew like a majestic, armored bird." Vyra felt a bubble of laughter rise in her own chest. It was involuntary, a release of tension that had been building for days. "He did have excellent aerodynamics," she admitted, a smile breaking through her royal mask. They laughed together, a shared, desperate sound in the small cockpit. For a moment, the bitterness was gone. For a moment, they were just Vyra and Ethan, survivors of a bad day. Back at the Kestrel workshop, the mood shifted back to grim reality. They met Captain Suri in the command center. Vera played the footage from the cache. The image of Regent Voss conspiring with the pale choir illuminated Suri's stoic face. "I knew he was ambitious," Suri said quietly. "But this is treason. He has been managing the court for months," Vera said, pacing the room. "Every time a general disagreed with him, they were reassigned. Every time a senator asked questions, they had an accident. It is worse than that." "Majesty," Suri admitted, looking down. "General Kalen, he didn't retire. He disappeared. I asked questions, and Voss told me that for the sake of the Empire, I should focus on my duties." "Why did you not tell me?" Vera demanded. "Because I was afraid," Suri said simply. "Afraid that if I spoke, I would disappear too. And then who would protect you?" Vyra sighed, her anger deflating. Suri was right. Voss had created a climate of terror so subtle that even the royal guard was paralyzed. "We have the evidence now," Ethan said. "We can expose him." "It is not enough," Vyra said. "We need to know what his endgame is. The Dragonheart core." She turned to Ethan. "You said the key was a fail-safe." Ethan leaned against the console. He looked exhausted. "The core is a living engine," he said. "It bonds to the royal bloodline. But it was designed by the ancients to be a weapon of last resort. It has a lockout mechanism. It requires 2 keys to activate fully. One is genetic, your blood. The other is physical, the dragon bone key." "And why does a human engineer have the physical key?" Vyra asked. "Because the ancients knew that power corrupts," Ethan said. They designed the system so that a dragon could not activate the weapon alone. They needed a partner, a grounding element, someone outside the power structure. A consciousness anchor, Vira whispered, remembering the old texts she had thought were metaphors. When we married, Ethan said, his voice quiet, the key. It woke up. It sensed our bond. It designated me as the anchor. Vira stared at him. The implications spun in her head. So when you took it, I realized Voss was looking for the core, Ethan said. I found his research. I knew if he found the core, he would try to force you to activate it. But he couldn't do it without the key. And he couldn't do it without me. So you ran, Vira said. To deny him the key. I ran to keep you from becoming a mass murderer, Ethan snapped. If Voss had the key, he would have tortured me until I unlocked it. He would have used me to force you to burn entire systems. You decided for me, Vira said, her voice rising. You decided my fate. You assumed I was too weak to resist him. I assumed you would do anything to save me, Ethan yelled back. And I was right, wasn't I? Look at you. You flew into a neutral zone and risked war just to fix a ship. If Voss had a knife to my throat 3 years ago, would you have refused him? Would you have let me die to save the galaxy? Vira opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The truth hung between them, stark and undeniable. She would have burned the universe to save him. You patronizing arrogance, she whispered, tears of rage stinging her eyes. You didn't just lose a wife, Ethan. You threw away the only person who saw you. You think I am just a symbol? Just a queen? I was a woman who loved you, and you didn't trust me enough to fight with me. You just left. I left to keep you alive, Ethan shouted. He stepped closer, invading her space. I lost everything to keep you alive. My name. My life? You think I like living in an asteroid? You think I don't miss the way the sun hits the palace gardens? You think I don't miss you? They were inches apart now. The air was electric. The anger was still there, but it was twisting, morphing into something else. Raw, bleeding vulnerability. Vira looked up at him. She saw the lines of pain around his eyes. She saw the love that he hadn't been able to kill. Ethan, she breathed. She reached out. Her hand hovered near his face. Ethan leaned in. His eyes dropped to her lips. The distance closed. Millimeters. The heat of her skin radiating against his. Warning. Bolt's voice shattered the moment like a hammer through glass. Emotional collision imminent. Please refrain from mating rituals in the command center. It is unsanitary. Also, you have a phone call. They sprang apart, chests heaving. Vira flushed a deep violet. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, looking like he wanted to punch the ceiling. What is it? Bolt? Ethan rasped. Incoming transmission. Encrypted royal frequency. Vira straightened her robes, forcing the mask of the queen back into place. Put it on screen. The face of a stern draconian admiral appeared. Queen Vira, the admiral said stiffly. You are summoned to the Galactic Peace Summit at the Citadel of Tides. Immediate attendance is required. I am indisposed, Vira said. This is not a request. Majesty, Regent Voss has presented evidence to the Senate that you have been conspiring with rogue elements in the neutral zone to destabilize the border. If you do not appear at the summit within 48 hours to answer these charges, the Senate will vote to strip you of your crown and label you a war criminal. The transmission cut out. Vira stood in silence. The trap had snapped shut. He is forcing me out of hiding, she said softly. He wants you at the summit, Ethan said, his mind already racing, calculating angles. Why? Because the Citadel of Tides is in the ancestral sector, Vira said, near the location of the old vaults. She looked at Ethan. He found the core. and he needs me there to open it. Then we go, Ethan said. We? Vira looked at him. I am the anchor, remember? Ethan said, picking up his tool belt. You can't save the galaxy without me. Vera looked at him. The anger was still there, but beneath it was a grudging, undeniable relief. She wasn't alone. Prepare the ship, she commanded. We have a summit to crash. The Citadel of Tides was a monument to the terrifying beauty of the Ardent Empire, carved directly into the basalt cliffs of a volcanic archipelago. The palace did not merely sit upon the land, it breathed with it. Veins of exposed magma ran through the floors behind thick armor-glass, heating the massive stone halls to a temperature that would stifle a human but felt like a warm embrace to a dragon. Vera walked down the docking ramp of the royal shuttle, her posture rigid, her face a mask of porcelain and iron. Behind her, struggling with a heavy case of equipment that looked suspiciously like a toolbox disguised as luggage, was Ethan. He was dressed in the stiff, high-collared formal wear of a court consultant, a role that existed mostly on paper to employ the fail sons of minor nobility. The fabric itched, and he looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle involving his own limbs. Name and clearance, the chief of palace security barked, stepping in front of Ethan. The guard was a massive draconian with scales the color of bruised obsidian and a jaw that looked capable of crushing diamonds. Ethan Cole, Vira said smoothly, stepping between them, civilian consultant for technical refits. He is here on my personal authority. The guard looked down at Ethan, sniffing the air. He smelled the grease, the human sweat, the lack of fire. He looked soft, the guard grumbled, and he smells like a used engine part. That is the smell of competence, Ethan said, offering a weak smile. And I will have you know, my mother says I have very firm bone structure. The guard blinked, confused by the humor. Vira suppressed a sigh. Let him pass. Commander, Vera ordered, or I will have you reassigned to the ice mining colonies on the outer rim. I hear the cold is excellent for the complexion. The guard stepped aside, but his eyes followed Ethan with the suspicion of a wolf watching a stray dog enter the den. Inside, the court was a sensory overload. Banners of silk and woven gold hung from ceilings lost in shadow. The air smelled of sulfur, expensive spice, and the metallic tang of ambition. Courtiers in robes that cost more than starships bowed as Vira passed, their smiles revealing teeth that had been filed sharp, a fashion statement that doubled as a threat. Regent Cale Voss waited at the foot of the Sun Throne. He dropped to one knee, his forehead touching the floor in a display of devotion so abject it felt like an insult. Majesty, Voss murmured, rising smoothly. We feared the worst. Rumors of your difficulties in the neutral zone had us paralyzed with grief. Your grief seems to have been productive, Regent, Vira said, gesturing to the crowded hall. You have organized a summit in my absence. We merely prepared the ground, Voss said, his eyes scanning Vira's face for cracks. The delegates from the Rim Coalition are already here. They are eager to discuss terms. But you look exhausted, my queen. The burden of rule. Perhaps you should rest before the opening ceremonies. Let me handle the tedious introductions. He was doing it already, subtly pushing her into the shadows, framing her as fragile, while he stood in the light as the capable hand of the state. I am not tired, Vera lied, though her bones ached from the gravity of the trip. And I will greet our guests. Consultant Cole will accompany me. Voss's gaze flicked to Ethan. For a split second, the mask slipped, revealing a flash of cold, reptilian calculation. Then, the smile returned. A human consultant, Voss noted. How progressive. I am sure he will find our customs fascinating. The dinner that evening was a minefield disguised as a banquet. The tables were slabs of heated obsidian, and the food was served alive or burning. Ethan, seated at the far end of the royal table, was trying to remain invisible. But the court of the Dragon Queen was not designed for human comfort. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The seat was radiating intense heat. Psst, he whispered to the Duke seated next to him, a hulking male with scars running down his snout. Is your chair trying to cook you, or is mine just malfunctioning? The Duke turned slowly. That is the thermal vent. Human. It is reserved for the elderly and the infirm, to keep their blood warm. Oh, Ethan said, realizing he had inadvertently claimed the dragon equivalent of a handicap seat. Right. Cozy. He reached for a goblet of wine, which was boiling. He set it down quickly. So, buddy, Ethan whispered again, who is the guy with the blue scales? He looks important. The Duke stared at him. Did you just call me buddy? It is a term of endearment. Ethan lied, sweating profusely. A title of high respect in my culture, like Archduke, but friendlier. Vera, seated at the head of the table, watched this interaction with a mixture of horror and amusement. She saw the Duke bristle, then pause, confused by the alien protocol. She brought a napkin to her lips to hide a smile that threatened to break her regal composure. Ethan was a disaster, but he was her disaster. However, the levity died when the datapads containing the summit agenda were distributed. Vera scrolled through the document. Her eyes narrowed. This is not a peace treaty, she said, her voice cutting through the chatter of the hall. Voss stood up, raising a glass. It is a framework for security. Majesty, the Rim Coalition has agreed to cede control of their border fortresses in exchange for protection from the pirate fleets. Protection? Vira slammed the datapad onto the table. This is annexation. If I sign this, I am not making peace. I am turning independent systems into vassal states. They will rebel within a year, and we will crush them, Voss said smoothly, his voice reasonable, soothing. Peace through strength. Majesty, it is the ardent way. I will not sign it, Vera said. Then the Senate will be very disappointed, Voss said, his smile not reaching his eyes. They have already ratified the preliminary draft. If you refuse, they might wonder if you have the stomach to do what is necessary. They might wonder if the rumors of your instability are true. The threat hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Sign, or we replace you. Vira stood up. The banquet is over. She swept out of the hall, signaling Ethan with a subtle tilt of her head. They did not go to her chambers. Instead, they moved through the servant corridors, slipping past the guards Voss had undoubtedly posted at her door. We need to get to the archives, Vera whispered as they descended a spiral staircase cut into the rock. My mother hid her personal logs there. If there is a truth about the Dragonheart core, she would have recorded it. The Imperial Archive was a vast circular chamber located deep beneath the palace, near the magma reservoir. It was hot, silent, and filled with the ghosts of history. Thousands of crystalline memory shards arranged on shelves like glowing jewels. Ethan used a bypass chip he had fabricated in the workshop to loop the security cameras. You are good at that, Vira noted, watching his hands work. I spent 3 years breaking into secure systems to find out if you were still alive, Ethan said, not looking up. Old habits? The admission hung in the air, but they did not stop. They found the section marked with the royal seal. Vera placed her hand on the reader. The DNA scanner pricked her palm, confirmed her bloodline, and a drawer hissed open. Inside was a single, dusty data crystal. Vira slotted it into the viewer. A hologram flickered to life. It was her mother, the late Queen Mara. She looked tired, her eyes haunted. "If you are watching this, Vira," the hologram spoke, its voice crackling with static, "then I have failed to destroy it. The Dragonheart core is not a gift from the gods. It is a mistake." The hologram brought up a schematic of the weapon. It was a complex lattice of biological and energy components. The ancients tried to harness the energy of a collapsing star. Queen Mara explained. "They succeeded, but the containment field is flawed. The core bonds to our blood, yes, but it feeds on it, and it is unstable. If activated at full power, it will not just destroy our enemies. It will trigger a subspace cascade. It will burn the atmosphere of every planet in the system. It will turn the Ardent sector into a grave of glass." Ethan stared at the schematic. "It is a suicide vest," he whispered, "a galaxy-sized suicide vest." "I tried to dismantle it," Mara continued, "but the guilds, the Senate, they would not let me. They see only power. So I have hidden the activation key. I have split the failsafe. Vira, you must never let them find the anchor." The hologram faded. Vira leaned against the console, her face pale. "Voss doesn't know," she said. "He thinks it is just a super weapon. He doesn't know he is building a bomb that will kill us all. Or he doesn't care," Ethan said grimly. He turned to her. "Vira, we have to destroy it, not just stop it. Destroy it, I know," she said. "But we can't do that if I am deposed. Or dead." She looked at him, her eyes searching. "Why did you leave?" "Ethan? Really?" Ethan froze. The silence of the archive pressed in on them. "You said you left to save me," Vira said, stepping closer. "But that is not the whole truth. I know you don't run from a fight unless the fight is already lost." "What happened that night?" Ethan looked away, staring at the cooling magma through the floor grates. "I came back to the room," he said, his voice quiet. "The night of the anniversary. I had the gift I made for you. And Voss was there." "In our bedroom?" Vira asked, her voice sharpening. "He wasn't alone," Ethan said. "He had guards, and he had a recording." Ethan took a breath, as if the memory itself was physical pain. "It was a recording of us, Vira. Private moments, intimate moments. He had bugs in the walls. He said he would release it to the galaxy. He would humiliate you. He would paint you as a deviant, a slave to a human's whims. He said the Senate would tear you apart." Vera felt the blood drain from her face. The violation made her nauseous. "I didn't care about my reputation," Ethan said, but he said something else. He said if I didn't leave, if I didn't disappear, he would arrange an accident for you, a shuttle crash, a poisoning. He looked at her, his eyes wet. He had the key. "Vira, he showed it to me. He said he needed the anchor gone so he could experiment with the core. If I stayed, you died. If I left, you were heartbroken, but you were alive, and you were queen. So I stole the key from him," Ethan whispered. "I punched him, grabbed the box, and I ran. I made him chase me. I drew the target on my back so he wouldn't look at you." Vira stood motionless. The anger that had fueled her for 3 years, the righteous fury of the abandoned wife, crumbled into dust. In its place was something far heavier. Grief. It wasn't a failure, she realized. Our marriage didn't fail. It was murdered. She felt a sob rise in her throat, a jagged thing that threatened to tear her apart. She had spent 1,000 nights hating him, rehearsing the insults she would scream if she ever saw him again. And all that time, he had been running through the dark, carrying the weight of her life in his hands. She looked at him, He wasn't the cocky engineer or the sarcastic ex-husband. He was just a man who was tired of being brave. "I hate you," she whispered, but the words had no bite. "I hate that you made that choice for me." "I know," Ethan said. "I am sorry." Vera closed the distance between them. She didn't strike him. She didn't embrace him. She just stood there, stripping away the layers of royalty, the armor of the queen. "I am not a queen right now," she said, her voice breaking. "I am just me." Ethan didn't crack a joke. He didn't try to fix the moment with wit. He simply nodded, accepting the weight of her vulnerability. "Then be you," he said softly. The private chamber adjacent to the archives was an old meditation room, warmed by a direct vent from the volcanic veins. The air was thick, heavy with heat and the scent of ozone. It was a place designed for dragons to shed their stress, to let their internal fire breathe. Vera walked in, and the heat hit her like a physical caress. Her skin flushed, a deep, luminous gold spreading across her cheeks and neck. She turned to Ethan. He was sweating, his hair damp, but he didn't step back. "This room is too hot for you," she said. "I'm fine," Ethan rasped, loosening his collar. "I like it warm." Vera stepped closer. The tension that had been building since the workshop, since the wedding, perhaps, finally peaked. It wasn't the frantic adrenaline of the battlefield. It was a slow, heavy pull, like the gravity of a black hole. She reached out and touched his face. Her fingers were hot, burning against his skin, but he leaned into the touch. "You were always the only one who didn't burn," she whispered. "I built up a tolerance," Ethan said, his voice barely audible. Vyra looked into his eyes. She saw the desire there, raw and terrified. But she also saw restraint. His hands were hovering at his sides, fists clenched. He was terrified of overstepping, of taking something she wasn't offering. "He is waiting for me," she realized. "He is giving me the power he took away 3 years ago." "Touch me," she said. It was not a command, it was a request. Ethan's hands came up, trembling slightly. He cupped her face, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. "Are you sure?" he asked. "No treaties, no fail-safes, just us. Just us." Vera breathed. He kissed her. It wasn't a desperate collision, and it was a slow, devastating reclaiming. His mouth was cool against hers, a contrast that made her nerves sing. She pulled him closer, her hands tangling in his hair, the heat of her body fogging the air around them. They sank to the floor, the cushions absorbing their weight. There was no frantic tearing of clothes, no race to the finish. It was a deliberate, agonizingly slow exploration. Ethan worshipped her with his hands, his lips, stopping every few moments to look at her, to make sure she was still there, still choosing this. For Vyra, the sensation was overwhelming. For years, she had been a symbol, a statue to be admired but not touched. Now, she was flesh and blood. She felt wanted, not for her crown, not for her bloodline, but for the messy, complicated woman she was in the dark. "I missed you," she whispered against his skin. "I never stopped," Ethan answered. They lay together in the haze of the heated room, the boundaries between queen and mechanic dissolving until there was only the shared rhythm of their breathing and the silence of a peace finally won. The next morning, the sun of the ardent prime system rose with a vengeance, flooding the room with blinding orange light. Vyra woke up feeling a strange sensation. Rest. She stretched, her limbs heavy and loose. She turned to look at Ethan, who was still asleep, one arm thrown over his eyes, snoring softly. It was a perfect domestic moment. Then, a cheerful chiptune melody began to blast from Ethan's wrist. Ethan jolted awake, flailing. "What? Who? Attack?" Bolt's voice, tinny and distorted, chirped from the comms unit. "Good morning, Starshine. The Earth says hello, playing morning after playlist, volume set to maximum awkwardness." Ethan scrambled to silence the device. "Bolt! Mute! Mute! I have detected elevated heart rates and dopamine levels." Bolt continued. "Would you like me to order breakfast or perhaps some hydration fluids? You humans desiccate so easily." Vira buried her face in a pillow, her shoulders shaking. She wasn't angry. She was laughing. "Turn it off," Ethan groaned, tapping the device. "I am trying." He hacked the firewall. He has administrator privileges. Vira sat up, the sheet falling away. She looked at Ethan, who was fighting a losing battle with his own wrist. "Let it play," she said, smiling. "It is better than the royal fanfare." The mood shifted as they prepared for the rehearsal of the summit's opening ceremony. The levity of the morning evaporated as they entered the grand hall. The delegates were gathering, representatives from the Rim Coalition, guild envoys, and the glittering elite of the Ardent Court. Voss was there, looking impeccably rested. "Majesty," he said, bowing. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, Regent," Vira said, her voice cool. "We are ready for the toast," Voss said, "a ceremonial drink to honor the ancestors." A servant approached with a tray of crystal flutes filled with a glowing blue liquid. It was spiced nectar, a traditional draconian drink. Vira reached for a glass. Ethan, standing a few paces behind her in his consultant guise, narrowed his eyes. He sniffed, under the heavy scent of spice and alcohol. There was something else, a faint, acrid smell, like burning insulation, or like the chemical propellant used in the workshop's solvent baths. "Don't drink it!" Ethan lunged forward. He knocked the glass from Vira's hand. It shattered on the floor. The liquid hissed as it touched the stone, bubbling and eating into the rock. The hall went silent. "Guards!" Voss shouted. "The human is mad! He has attacked the queen! It's a toxin!" Ethan yelled, backing up as guards drew their weapons. "That's not nectar. That's Cygnus 5 solvent. It's tuned to react with draconian stomach acid. It would have burned her from the inside out." Voss's eyes went cold. He looked at the bubbling stone. "An unfortunate accident," Voss said smoothly. "The vintage must have turned. Remove the consultant. He is clearly distressed." Before the guards could grab him, Vira stepped in front of Ethan. Her eyes were blazing. "Stand down," she commanded. The guards hesitated. "My consultant has a keen nose," Vira said, staring at Voss. "It seems the wine cellar needs to be inspected. Perhaps the regent should taste it first next time." Voss bowed stiffly. "As you wish, Majesty." Across the room, the lead delegate of the Rim Coalition, a reptilian woman named Ambassador Krell, was watching the scene with narrowed eyes. A servant was offering her a glass from the same tray. Vera moved instantly. She crossed the room and gently took the glass from the ambassador's hand. "I would not recommend the vintage, Ambassador," Vera said loudly enough for the room to hear. "It seems to be unstable. Let us drink water instead. Clarity is preferable to tradition today." Krell looked at the bubbling stain on the floor, then at Vera. She nodded slowly. "You saved my life, Queen Vera," Krell said softly. "That glass was meant for me as well, wasn't it?" "A dead ambassador starts a war," Vira said. "A dead queen just changes the management." "We need to leave," Ethan whispered in Vira's ear. "Now." They retreated to Vira's private study, locking the heavy doors. "He tried to kill you," Ethan said, pacing the room in front of everyone. "He is getting desperate." "He failed," Vira said, "and he exposed himself. Ambassador Krell knows something is wrong, but we still don't have the proof to link him to the Pale Choir," Ethan said. "We need..." A chime at the door interrupted them. It was Captain Suri. She looked pale, her uniform disheveled. "Majesty," she gasped. "What is it?" Vira asked. "General Thorne," Suri said. "Your most trusted commander, the one who controls the orbital fleet. What about him?" "He has been arrested," Suri said, handing Vira a datapad. "For treason. They say he was plotting a coup." Vira looked at the warrant. Her hand trembled. "This is my seal," she whispered. "This is my digital signature. Voss forged it," Ethan said. "No," Vira said, looking up, horror in her eyes. "It is not a forgery. It is authentic. He has access to the royal matrix. He has been signing death warrants in my name for months." She dropped the pad. "He has the fleet. Ethan. He has the court. And tomorrow, he will have the summit. Then we have to take them back," Ethan said, his voice hard. "Tonight?" "How?" Vira asked. "We are two people against an empire." "No," Ethan said, a dangerous grin forming on his face. "We are a dragon queen and a workshop engineer. We don't play by their rules. We break them." The days following the attempted poisoning were a masterclass in aggressive politeness. Vira did not scream. She did not burn the palace down. Instead, she moved through the imperial court like a glacier, slow, cold, and crushing anything that stood in her path with the sheer weight of her presence. She could not openly accuse Regent Voss. Not yet. The evidence they had gathered in the ship graveyard proved he was corrupt, but it did not link him directly to the assassination attempt, and the Senate was still eating out of his hand. So Vira played a different game. She played chess with living pieces. "Regent," Vira said during the morning briefing, her voice smooth as polished glass. "I have been reviewing the security protocols. I feel that your personal guard, Captain Hark, is overqualified for door duty. I am reassigning him to the Eastern Wastes to oversee the Tabana gas refineries. His talents will be invaluable there." Voss stiffened. Hark was his primary enforcer, the man who made people disappear. "Majesty," Voss protested, his smile tight. "The wastes are remote. Captain Hark is vital to my safety. Your safety is paramount, which is why I have replaced him with a squad of royal house guards sworn directly to the bloodline," Vira countered. "They will watch you day and night. Regent, they will not let you out of their sight. For your protection, of course." Voss bowed, but his eyes were murderous. He had been placed under house arrest, and Vira had framed it as a promotion. While Vira dismantled Voss's power structure from the throne, Ethan was dismantling it from the servants' quarters. He had set up a makeshift workshop in the barracks, much to the confusion of the royal guard. Captain Suri sat on a crate of ammunition, watching Ethan solder a microscopic chip onto the back of a ruby earring. "You are telling me," Suri said, skepticism dripping from her voice, "that this jewelry will bypass the Senate surveillance grid?" "It is not just jewelry," Ethan said, peering through a magnifying lens. "It is a resonant frequency jammer disguised as high fashion. If you wear this, the cameras will just see a blur where your face should be. It exploits the refresh rate of the sensors." Suri picked up the earring. It looked expensive. "And the necklace?" she asked, pointing to a heavy gold chain. "Short-range EMP," Ethan said. "If anyone tries to shock cuff you, that chain will fry their neural link. Also, it goes great with your eyes." Suri snorted. "You are a strange little man, Cole. When Her Majesty first brought you here, I thought you were a pet. And now I think you are a dangerous little man," Suri said. "Which is better?" They had formed an unlikely alliance, born of shared sarcasm and a mutual desire to keep Vira alive. Suri was the muscle, Ethan was the brain, and together they were building a shadow network right under Voss's nose. They traded jabs like boxers sparring, a way to vent the tension of living in a palace where the walls had ears. "Speaking of dangerous," Suri said, checking her data pad, "it is time for the pre-Senate gala. Her Majesty requested you be in full ceremonial attire." Ethan groaned. "The armor?" "You mean the oven," he corrected. 10 minutes later, Ethan stood in Vira's private chambers, looking miserable. He was encased in the ceremonial dress of a consort consultant, a suit of polished bronze plates that were, for reasons known only to draconian sadists, heated. The suit had internal thermal coils designed to keep a cold-blooded reptile comfortable in a drafty hall. For a warm-blooded human, it was like wearing a toaster. "You look dashing," Vira said, walking into the room. She was wearing a gown of woven sunlight, her scales shimmering with gold dust. She stopped when she saw him, biting her lip. "I look like a baked potato wrapped in foil," Ethan said, sweating. "Why is it hot? Why is everything on this planet hot?" "It symbolizes the warmth of the dragon's heart," Vira said, her voice trembling with suppressed laughter. "It symbolizes heat stroke," Ethan muttered, adjusting the collar which was currently searing his neck. "Can I take the helmet off?" "Only during the toast," Vira said, "and try not to faint. It would be diplomatically awkward." She walked over to him. The amusement faded from her eyes, replaced by a soft, fierce affection. She reached out and adjusted his pauldron, her cool fingers grazing his heated skin. "Thank you," she whispered, "for doing this, for staying." "I am not going anywhere," Ethan said, ignoring the sweat trickling down his back. "Besides, I hear the hors d'oeuvres are magma-glazed. I wouldn't miss it." The target was the Senate Orbital Annex, a massive ring station floating in the upper atmosphere of the homeworld. It was the administrative heart of the empire, a place of marble floors, zero-gravity gardens, and paranoia. The gala was merely the cover. While Voss was busy charming the delegates from the rim, Vira and Ethan slipped away. "We have 20 minutes before they realize the Queen is missing," Vira said as they moved briskly down a service corridor. "The archives are on the secure level." They reached the vault door. It wasn't a physical door, it was a shimmering curtain of distorted light. "Reality warping field," Ethan noted, checking his scanner. "It bends space back on itself. If you try to walk through without the key, you just end up walking back out the way you came." "Can you break it?" Vira asked. "Break it? No. Confuse it? Yes." Ethan pulled a device from his pocket that looked like a kaleidoscope welded to a battery. He activated it, and the device emitted a pulses of chaotic geometric light. "I am feeding it conflicting spatial data," Ethan explained, "telling it that up is down, left is right, and Tuesday is a color. It should create a momentary gap." The field flickered, destabilized by the logic bomb. A hole appeared in the center of the light. "After you, Majesty," Ethan said. They stepped through into the vault. It was a cold room, lined with banks of physical data ledgers. The pale choir did not trust digital storage for their financial records. They used isotopic crystal tablets that couldn't be hacked remotely. Ethan scanned the shelves. "We are looking for the sub-ledger marked pacification payments." "There," Vira said, pointing to a dark crystal on the top shelf. Ethan pulled it down and slotted it into his reader. The data scrolled by. Trillions of credits moved through shell companies, weapon purchases, bribes to senators, and then the payout manifest. He scrolled to the bottom, looking for the link to Voss. He found it, but he also found something else. Ethan stopped breathing. "What is it?" Vira asked, leaning over his shoulder. "Did you find Voss?" Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. He stared at the screen, the blood draining from his face. The payments from the Pale Choir were not just going to Voss. A significant portion of the funds, millions of credits a month, was being routed to an account labeled Widower Relief Fund, beneficiary, Ethan Cole. Vira read the name. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than the gravity of the planet below. It was colder than the void outside. Vera stepped back. Her eyes, which had been warm only an hour ago, were now slits of molten gold. "Ethan," she said. Her voice was not angry. It was terrified. Ethan shook his head. "No." "Vira, no." "It is your name," she whispered. "It is your identity code." "I didn't," Ethan stammered, his hands shaking as he held the reader. "I didn't take this money. I didn't know about this." "You left me," Vira said. Her voice cracked. "You left me. And suddenly you have millions of credits in a secret account?" "It is a frame-up," Ethan shouted, the sound echoing in the vault. "Don't you see? Voss knew I was the anchor. He set this up years ago. If I ever came back, if I ever tried to expose him, he could point to this and say I was paid to leave." "Or maybe you were," Vera said. The doubt was there. It was a tiny, poisonous seed that had been planted 3 years ago, watered by her grief and humiliation. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But the evidence was staring her in the face. "You think I sold you?" Ethan asked. His voice was quiet now, broken. "You really think I sold our marriage for credits?" "I don't know what to think," Vira cried. "I am a queen. Ethan, I am trained to suspect everyone. And you ran away. I ran to save you, so you say. But maybe you just ran because you were rich." They stared at each other across the vault. The air between them was charged with 3 years of unresolved pain. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the core wound of their relationship, the fear that love was not enough to bridge the gap between their worlds. "I didn't take it," Ethan said, tears standing in his eyes. "I would burn every credit in the galaxy just to hold your hand for 1 minute. You have to believe me." Vera looked at him. She saw the man who had pulled her behind a shield in the workshop, the man who had worn a burning suit of armor just to make her smile, the man who looked at her not like a queen, but like she was the sun and he was freezing. She closed her eyes. She took a breath. She chose. "I believe you," she whispered. She opened her eyes. "I believe you because if you were smart enough to steal millions, you would be smart enough to buy better shoes." Ethan let out a choked laugh that was half a sob. He looked down at his battered workshop boots. "They are comfortable," he defended weakly. Vira stepped forward and took the reader from his hand. "Voss is trying to use my trust against me," she said. "He planted this. He wants me to doubt you. He wants me to be alone." She smashed the crystal tablet on the floor. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. "I am done playing his game," Vera said. "We have enough evidence in the rest of the ledger to hang him. I don't need to know where the money went. I know where your heart is." Ethan looked at her, stunned by the absolute pardon. "You are terrified, aren't you?" he asked softly. "Yes," Vera admitted. "I am terrified that if I love you, I will be weak, that I will be controllable." "And I am terrified," Ethan said, taking her hand, "that you will choose the empire over me. That one day, being a queen will be more important than being Vira." "I can be both," she said. "I have to be both." She squeezed his hand. "Let's go take back my throne." They returned to the gala just as the main event was beginning. The Senate chamber was a vast amphitheater, seating 5,000 delegates. At the center stood a podium surrounded by holographic emitters. Voss was there, looking triumphant. He had moved up the schedule. Delegates of the Empire, Voss's voice boomed, amplified by the speakers. We stand at a crossroads. The peace we seek is fragile, and I regret to inform you that the greatest threat to that peace comes not from without, but from within. The holographic emitters flared to life. A massive video screen appeared above the podium. It was footage of Vyra, but it was edited, sliced, and recontextualized. It showed her arguing with generals, looking manic. It showed her leaving the palace in disguise. And then, it showed grainy footage of her in the Kestrel workshop, being pulled behind a crate by a human male. The Queen, Voss intoned, his voice dripping with faux sadness, has been compromised. She has fallen under the influence of a human radical, an operative known as Ethan Cole. He has seduced her, isolated her, and turned her against her own counsel. The crowd gasped. Murmurs of treason rippled through the stands. This man, Voss continued, pointing to a distorted image of Ethan, is a terrorist. He has manipulated Her Majesty into rejecting the peace treaty. He seeks to plunge us into war for his own profit. Vyra stood at the back of the hall. She felt the eyes of the Senate turn toward her. She felt the weight of the judgment. This was the trap, the public shaming. Voss was using her love as a weapon to strip her of her authority. Ethan looked at her. He made a move to step forward to defend her. But Vyra put a hand on his chest. "No," she said. "This is my fight." She walked down the aisle. She did not run. She did not shout. She walked with a slow, predatory rhythm, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The crowd parted for her. She reached the podium. Voss looked down at her, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Majesty," he said, "you have returned. We were just discussing your condition." "My condition?" Vyra asked into the microphone. Her voice was calm, but it carried a resonance that vibrated in the chest of every dragon in the room. "Yes," Voss said, "your vulnerability, your entanglement with this human." Vyra looked up at the screen, at the image of her and Ethan. Then she looked out at the crowd. "Regent Voss calls it a weakness," Vyra said. "He calls it a seduction. He tells you that because I love a human, I am unfit to rule." She paused. The silence was deafening. "He is right about one thing," Vyra said. "I do love him." The Senate erupted in shock. Voss blinked, his smile faltering. He had expected her to deny it, to lie. "I love him," Vyra continued, her voice rising, cutting through the noise. "And you should be grateful that I do." She turned to face the cameras. "For generations. The ardent throne has been cold. We have ruled with fire and fear. We have burned our enemies and silenced our dissenters. And look where it has gotten us. A galaxy that fears us. A Senate that plots in shadows. A regent who sells his own people to mercenaries for profit." She pointed a finger at Voss. "He tells you that love makes me weak. I tell you that love is the only thing that makes me strong enough to see the truth. It takes courage to love someone who is different from you. It takes courage to trust. It takes courage to be human." She looked at Ethan, standing in the aisle. "My husband did not seduce me. He saved me. He reminded me that a queen who cannot feel is not a ruler. She is a tyrant. And I am done being a tyrant for your comfort." She turned back to Voss. "I refuse your shame, Regent, and I refuse your treaty. Because true power is not about control. It is about transparency." She pulled the data crystal from her robe, the real one, the backup she had made. "This is the ledger of the Pale Choir," she announced. "It details every bribe, every murder, every credit paid to Regent Voss to sell this empire into slavery. She jammed the crystal into the podium's data port. The giant screen flickered. The footage of Vira vanished. In its place, the ledger appeared, scrolling lines of incriminating data, emails, voice logs. Voss's face, negotiating with the shapeshifter, appeared in high definition. The Senate hall exploded into chaos. Voss's face turned a shade of gray she had never seen before. He looked at Vira with pure, unadulterated hatred. "Kill them," Voss screamed. "Kill them all." The doors of the Senate chamber burst open, but it wasn't the royal guard. It was the pale choir. Dozens of agents, disguised as Senate security, threw off their cloaks. They raised kinetic rifles. They weren't there to arrest anyone. They were there to liquidate the witnesses. Ethan sprinted down the aisle. Vira summoned her fire. A wall of blue flame erupted around the podium, vaporizing the first volley of kinetic rounds. "Run!" she commanded. She grabbed Ethan's hand, and they bolted. Not toward the exit, it was blocked, but toward the maintenance access panel behind the dais. Vera melted the lock with a touch, and they dove into the service tunnels just as the podium disintegrated under heavy fire. The tunnels were a maze of pipes and cabling. Drones buzzed behind them, small, fast hunter-killers deployed by the pale choir. "They are gaining on us," Ethan yelled, checking his wrist scanner. "We need a door," Vira shouted. "There are no doors here. It is a sealed conduit." Ethan fumbled in his belt and pulled out a strange, heavy tool. It looked like a monkey wrench that had been exposed to radiation and abstract art. "The probability wrench," he muttered. "Okay." Bolt said this was experimental. He said it might turn me into a newt, but we are out of options. "What does it do?" Vira asked, dodging a laser blast. "It loosens the local causality," Ethan yelled. "It untightens the reality of the wall." He slammed the wrench against the solid durasteel wall of the tunnel. Click. The wall didn't break. It opened. For a split second, the metal became a doorway, but it didn't lead to the next room. It led to a beach, a sunny, tropical beach with purple sand and 2 moons. "Wrong door!" Ethan yelled, slamming the wrench again. The scene shifted. Now the door opened into a blizzard. Snow blew into the tunnel. Too cold. Ethan hit it a 3rd time. The door opened into a janitor's closet on the lower level of the station. "Good enough." They dived through. Ethan pulled the wrench back, and the wall slammed shut behind them, solidifying instantly. A thud echoed from the other side as a drone slammed into the rematerialized steel. They collapsed on the floor of the closet, surrounded by mops and buckets. "You turned a wall into a beach." Vera panted. "It was a very nice beach." Ethan wheezed. "I think we should go there for a vacation." Assuming we survived the next 10 minutes, they checked the ledger they had stolen. Vera scrolled through the data on her portable reader. "We have Voss," she said. "The Senate saw the truth. His political career is over." "But the war isn't," Ethan said, pointing to a file at the end of the list. "Look." The file was a transport manifest. Item, Royal Relic Class Alpha. Destination, Ardent Prime Surface. Courier, Regent Voss. Status, in transit. Emergency Authority Code, Omega. "He has the scepter," Vira said, her eyes widening. "The ancient focusing lens. It is the last component he needs to activate the core." He isn't fighting for the Senate anymore, Ethan realized. He knows he's lost the politics. So he's going for the nuclear option. "He is going to the Dragonheart Vault," Vira said, standing up. "He is going to activate the core himself." "But he can't," Ethan said. "He doesn't have the key." "I have the key." "He doesn't need to do it safely," Vira said grimly. "He just needs to turn it on. If he forces the activation without the anchor, it will overload." Ethan finished. "It will blow the planet up." And he will probably blame it on me from his escape pod, Vera said. She kicked the door of the closet open. We have to beat him to the surface. How? Ethan asked. The hangars are locked down. Vera looked at him, a dangerous smile spreading across her face. You are the best engineer in the galaxy, she said. Build us a way down. Or, Ethan said, looking at a nearby escape pod hatch labeled maintenance use only. We could just fall with style. They ran for the pods. The Empire was burning, the Senate was in ruins, and the Regent was racing to destroy the world. But as they strapped into the pod, Vyra reached out and took Ethan's hand. I meant what I said, she whispered, about courage. I know, Ethan said, squeezing her hand tight. And about the vacation, she added. Purple sand sounds nice. Ethan laughed as he punched the launch button. Let's go save the world first, Your Majesty. The pod shot away from the station, streaking down toward the planet like a falling star, racing the doom that waited below. The galaxy did not slide into war. It fell off a cliff. Within 12 hours of the Senate debacle, the border beacons of the Arden Empire turned from the steady pulsing green of peace to the strobing crimson of conflict. Reports flooded the comms channels on the flight deck of the Kestrel workshop, a cacophony of panic and orchestrated violence. 3 mining colonies in the outer rim had been shelled by unmarked cruisers. A trade route in the core systems was blockaded by rogue insurgents flying flags that looked suspiciously like Vyra's own royal crest. Vera stood before the holographic map in Ethan's command center, her face illuminated by the blooming red lights of a dozen skirmishes. She had shed the ceremonial gown for practical workshop leathers, reinforced with dragon-scale weave. He is lighting the fires, Vyra said, her voice low and dangerous. He is creating the exact emergency he needs to justify using the core. He is thorough. I will give him that, Ethan said. He was frantically welding a secondary power coupling to a heavy-looking rifle. He is burning the edges of the map so the center begs him for salvation. The Kestrel workshop was no longer a quiet forge. It had become a bunker. Following their escape from the Senate station, a terrifying freefall in a maintenance pod that Suri had miraculously intercepted with a guild hauler, they had retreated here. It was the only place with shields strong enough to hold off a fleet and the only place containing the tools Ethan needed to interface with the Dragonheart core. But safety was a temporary luxury. Sensors are lighting up, Captain Suri announced from the ops console. She had a bandage wrapped around her head, a souvenir from the Senate extraction, but her hands were steady. Massive hyperspace signatures emerging in Sector 4. Is it the Royal Fleet? Vyra asked. No, Suri said, her eyes widening. It is mercenaries, hundreds of them. And by the ancestors, they have a Siegebreaker-class dreadnought. They are not here to arrest us, Ethan said, snapping the power cell into his rifle. They are here to liquidate the asset. The Kestrel workshop shuddered as the first volley of torpedoes slammed into the asteroid's void shields. Dust shook from the ceiling pipes. Bolt! Ethan yelled. Status report! Customer satisfaction surveys have been sent to the incoming fleet, the AI announced, its voice booming through the hangar. Preliminary feedback indicates a 0-star rating. Also, the shields are at 60% and dropping. Suggestion: do not die. It voids the warranty on your boots. They are breaching the main hangar, Suri shouted. Let them in, Vera ordered. Suri looked at her. Majesty, let them in, Vera repeated, her eyes burning with a cold, tactical fury. In space, they are a fleet. In here, they are fuel. The main blast doors of the Kestrel workshop groaned and slid open. A swarm of mercenary dropships screamed into the cavernous interior, their engines flaring white-hot. Troops in heavy-powered armor poured out, weapons raised, expecting a panic. What they got was a workshop that had been weaponized by the galaxy's most chaotic engineer. "Now," Ethan said. He slammed his hand onto a control panel. The gravity generators in the floor reversed polarity. The mercenaries were instantly yanked upward, flailing in zero-G. Then, the molten rivers of alloy, usually guided by magnetic fields for casting, were unleashed, ribbons of liquid metal, burning at 2,000 degrees. Snaked through the air like lashes of a fire whip, Vyra moved. She launched herself off the gantry, her body wreathed in blue flame. In the zero-gravity environment, she was not bound by physics. She became a comet. She flew through the suspended mercenaries, her fire cutting through armor plating and sensory arrays. She didn't kill with cruelty. She dismantled with efficiency. Ethan stayed on the high ground, using a magnetic grappling cannon to tear dropships out of the air and slam them into the walls. Drones the size of dinner plates swarmed around him like angry metal bees, firing micro-lasers at anyone who tried to flank him. "Bolt!" Ethan shouted. "Sector 4 is overwhelmed." Initiating safety compliance protocol. Bolt chirped. A squad of mercenaries stormed the eastern catwalk. Suddenly, the blast doors on either side of them slammed shut, sealing them in a 10-foot corridor. "Enemies have been locked in the gender-neutral restrooms," Bolt announced. "Please wash your hands before returning to the firefight." Despite the chaos, despite the absurdity, the enemy numbers were overwhelming. For every ship they swatted down, 2 more breached the airlock. They were pushing toward the command center, toward the key. They retreated to the inner sanctum, a reinforced bunker deep in the asteroid's core. Ethan sealed the blast door, welding it shut with a plasma torch. "It won't hold them for long," Suri said, reloading her pulse pistol. "We don't need long," Vyra said, breathing hard. The fire in her veins was dimming. The combat was exhausting her reserves. "We just need to get to the ship and jump to the homeworld. We have to beat Voss to the vault." Ethan stopped welding. He turned to look at Vyra. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the dragon bone key. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic amber light, matching the beat of Vyra's heart. "You need to know," Ethan said, his voice quiet in the sudden silence of the bunker. "You asked me why I had the key, why I was the anchor." Vyra looked at him. "Because you are a brilliant engineer," she said. "Because you understand the tech." "No," Ethan said. He stepped closer, taking her hand and placing the key in her palm. He closed his fingers over hers. The key flared. A warm resonance traveled up Vyra's arm, a sensation of absolute, unshakable safety. "The ancients didn't design the core to be controlled by a scientist," Ethan said. "They designed it to be controlled by a bond. The failsafe requires 2 neural patterns. One is the bloodline, the raw power. The other is the stabilizer, the grounding wire." He looked into her eyes. "It requires mutual intent. Vyra, it requires trust. Absolute, terrified, unconditional trust. The key didn't activate for me because I fixed the palace heaters. It activated the night of the wedding, when I looked at you and didn't see a queen, but a partner." Vyra stared at the glowing bone in her hand. "It recognized us," she whispered. "It recognized love," Ethan corrected. Voss tried to counterfeit it. He tried to synthesize a neural match, but he couldn't. "That is why he wanted me gone. He couldn't replicate the way I feel about you." Tears pricked Vyra's eyes. Their relationship, which she had spent 3 years believing was a political sham that ended in betrayal, was literally the only thing holding the galaxy together. The blast door groaned. A plasma cutter began to slice through the metal. "We have to go," Suri urged. "The rear airlock is..." A massive explosion rocked the bunker. The wall behind them, the reinforced stone of the asteroid itself, blew inward. Dust and smoke filled the room. Vira was thrown against the console. Ethan was knocked to the floor. Through the hole in the wall, a figure stepped in. It was not a mercenary. It was Regent Cale Voss. He was flanked by elite Pale Choir commandos, and in his grip, held by the throat, was Captain Suri. Suri had been near the rear exit. They had flanked her. Voss looked immaculate, untouched by the war he had started. He held a kinetic pistol to Suri's temple. "Majesty," Voss said, his voice smooth and terrible. "The mechanic." Vera scrambled to her feet, her hands igniting. "Let her go." "Voss," she snarled. "Give me the key," Voss said pleasantly. "And give me the human, or your loyal captain becomes a mural on this wall." "Don't do it, Majesty," Suri gasped, clawing at Voss's armored glove. "He needs the key to burn the worlds." "One life isn't worth—" Voss tightened his grip. Suri choked, her eyes bulging. "I will count to 3, Voss said. 1. Vira froze. The calculation screamed in her mind. Strategic logic dictated she sacrifice Suri. Suri was one soldier. The core threatened billions. To surrender the key was madness. To surrender Ethan was death. 2. Vera looked at Suri. She saw the loyalty, the years of service, the shared silence of the cockpit. She looked at Ethan. He was standing up, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. He gave her a tiny nod. 3. "Stop!" Vira screamed. The fire in her hands died. She fell to her knees. "I surrender." "Vera, no!" Suri rasped. Vera looked at Voss, her eyes hard as diamond. "I am not surrendering because I am weak. Regent, I am surrendering because true authority protects its people. It does not spend them like currency." Voss laughed, a hollow, victorious sound. "How touching," he said, "and how utterly predictable. That is why you will lose. Vira, you have a heart." He shoved Suri toward his guards, who shackled her instantly. "Bring the key," Voss commanded, "and the human." Ethan stepped forward. He walked past Vira, but he didn't look defeated. He looked furious. He stopped in front of Voss, staring up at the taller Draconian. "You think you have won," Ethan said. "I have the queen on her knees." Voss sneered. "I have the key, and I have you." "I have won." Ethan smiled. It was the sharp, jagged smile of a man who had grown up in a workshop full of dangerous tools. "You have the queen on her knees because she chose to be there," Ethan said. "She chose mercy. You wouldn't understand that. You think power is taking things." Ethan turned to Vira. He ignored the guns pointed at him. He ignored the regent. He walked back to her, reached down, and pulled her to her feet. "Stand up, Vira," he said softly. "You don't kneel to him. You don't kneel to anyone." He cupped her face in his hands. The entire room held its breath. "She chooses her own fate," Ethan said loud enough for the commandos to hear, and then he kissed her. It wasn't a goodbye, it was a transfer of energy. It was a public, defiant declaration that they were a unit, unbroken by fear or politics. They clung to each other for a second too long, trembling not with terror, but with the sheer electric force of their connection. "Get off her!" Voss shouted, aiming his pistol. But before he could fire, a chirping sound echoed from the comms units of the Pale Choir commandos. The lead commando, a shapeshifter whose face was currently a blur of gray static, tapped his earpiece. "Directive update," the commando said. The synthesized voice was devoid of emotion. Voss frowned. "What? Kill them. Take the key." "Client contract terminated," the commando said. "Asset acquisition protocols initiated. The Pale Choir is assuming direct control of the artifact." Voss's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" I am your client. You were a middleman, the commando said. The core is too valuable for a local warlord. We are liquidating the partnership. The commando raised his rifle, not at Vira, but at Voss. Chaos erupted. The mercenaries turned on the regent's personal guard. Voss screamed in rage, firing his kinetic pistol blindly. Ethan grabbed Vira's arm. Run! They bolted toward the breach in the wall, grabbing Suri as they passed. The room dissolved into a three-way firefight between Voss's loyalists, the mercenaries, and the station's automated defenses, which Bolt had helpfully reactivated with a cheerful announcement of, "Happy hour is over." They sprinted through the maintenance tunnels, reaching the private hangar where Vira's courier ship waited. They blasted out of the asteroid's bay just as the Kestrel workshop's main reactor began to cycle toward a self-destruct overload. Bolt's final act of defiance. To the homeworld, Vira ordered, strapping into the pilot's seat. Voss will escape. He has the scepter. He is going to the vault. The race to Ardent Prime was a blur of hyperspace distortion. When they dropped out of light speed above the planet, the sky was already darkening. Storms were gathering over the Dragonheart vaults, an unnatural swirling vortex of purple and black clouds. Voss is already there, Suri said, scanning the surface. I am detecting a massive energy spike in the southern hemisphere. He is forcing the activation, Ethan said, checking the biometric readings on the key. He is trying to bypass the anchor protocol with the scepter. Land us on the temple steps, Vera said. They descended through the storm. The Dragonheart vault was a massive ziggurat of black stone, older than the Empire itself. The doors stood open, and the bodies of the temple guardians were strewn across the stairs. They ran inside. The air grew hotter with every step, heavy with the scent of ozone and ancient magic. The central chamber was a cavern vast enough to hold a moon. In the center, suspended above a pit of magma, was the core. It was a sphere of living light, pulsing with a heartbeat that shook the stone beneath their feet. It was beautiful and terrifying, a star trapped in a cage. On a platform extending toward the core stood Voss. He held a golden scepter aloft. The core was lashing out at him, tendrils of energy striking the shield generator he wore on his belt. You will obey me, Voss screamed at the light. I am the Regent! I am the Blood! Vira stepped onto the platform. It does not know you. Voss! She shouted. Her voice was amplified by the acoustics of the chamber, sounding like the judgment of a god. Voss spun around. He looked ragged, his armor scorched. The betrayal by the pale choir had unhinged him. He was no longer the smooth politician. He was a desperate man holding a grenade. I don't need it to know me, Voss yelled. I just need it to burn. He slammed the scepter into the control pedestal. The core screamed. It was a sound that was felt rather than heard, a psychic shriek that brought Vira to her knees. Visions flooded her mind. She saw the future Voss wanted. She saw worlds burning. She saw her fleet turning cities to glass. She saw herself on a throne of ash, ruling a graveyard, her heart cold and dead. Then the vision shifted. She saw the future she feared. She saw herself abdicating, the empire fracturing, chaos consuming her people because she was too weak to do what was necessary. No. Ethan's voice cut through the visions. He was beside her, pulling her up. Look at me, Vira. Look at me. She focused on his face. The visions receded. We do this together, Ethan said. Bond the key. We shut it down. They moved toward the pedestal. Voss fired at them, but his aim was wild, shaken by the energy surging through the room. Suri provided covering fire from the doorway, pinning Voss behind a pillar. Vira and Ethan reached the interface. The heat was unbearable. Vira's skin was glowing, her internal fire rising to match the core. Ethan was gasping, his human physiology pushed to the limit. Ethan slotted the dragon bone key into the port. Vira placed her hand over his. Together, she whispered. The core reacted instantly. The angry red pulsing shifted to a confused violet. It sensed the anchor. It sensed the bond. Authorization recognized. A voice echoed, not from speakers, but inside their heads. Harmonization initiating. Voss roared. He abandoned his cover, charging at them with a vibroblade. He couldn't stop the process, so he would kill the anchor. Ethan saw him coming. He didn't have a weapon, his hands were locked on the key. Vera couldn't move. Her energy was channeling into the core. Voss lunged, the blade aiming for Ethan's heart. At the last second, Ethan twisted his body. The blade didn't hit his heart. It plunged into his shoulder, pinning him to the console. Ethan screamed. Ethan! Vira's scream tore her throat. The pain shattered her focus. Her connection to the core wavered. The violet light fractured back into angry red. Voss laughed, ripping the blade out. He raised it for a killing stroke. Vira's control snapped. The grief hit her like a physical wave. The thought of losing him, after everything, after the workshop, the heist, the kiss, it was too much. The carefully maintained dam of her royal composure broke. Her internal fire didn't just rise, it exploded. Her eyes turned pure white. The heat radiating from her body spiked so high that the stone beneath her boots began to melt. "You hurt him," she said. The voice wasn't hers. It was the voice of the dragon heart itself. The core responded to her rage. It flared, feeding on her grief. A tendril of raw, stellar energy lashed out, not at the star maps, but at her command. It struck Voss. He didn't scream. He didn't have time. He was simply erased. One moment he was a regent, the next, he was a shadow burned into the wall. But the energy didn't stop. It was feeding back into Vira, pulling her into the inferno. She was becoming the weapon. She was going to burn the vault, the city, the planet. She couldn't stop. The grief was a fuel source more potent than any star. Vira. Ethan gasped. He was slumped against the console, blood pooling under him. His voice was weak, barely a whisper over the roar of the fire. "Come back." Vira looked down. She saw him through the haze of white fire. He was dying. And she was the one killing him with her heat. Don't burn the world. Ethan wheezed, reaching out a trembling, bloody hand. Just warm me. The words pierced the rage. Just warm me. It was what he had said on their wedding night. It was the promise of their life together, not to burn, but to warm. Vira gasped. The white fire receded from her eyes. She clamped down on the power, forcing the dragon back into the cage of her heart. She grabbed Ethan's hand. She channeled the energy not outward, but inward, into the bond, into the key. Shut down, she commanded the core. The core pulsed once, blindingly bright, and then silence. The light died. The magma pit dimmed. The scepter shattered into dust. Vira fell to her knees, catching Ethan as he collapsed. "Ethan," she whispered, pressing her hands to his wound, cauterizing it with a gentle, controlled heat. "Stay with me." Ethan looked up at her. His face was pale, gray as ash. He smiled, a weak, flickering thing. "Did we win?" he whispered. "Yes." Vera sobbed. "We won." "Good." Ethan breathed. His eyes fluttered shut. "Then I'm going to take a nap." "Ethan." But he didn't answer. The only sound in the vast dark vault was the weeping of a queen who had saved the galaxy but might have lost her world. The blast of white fire that had erupted from Vira did not destroy the world, but it shattered the silence of the Dragonheart vault. The echo of her rage rolled through the cavern, shaking dust from the ancient basalt ceiling. But as the dust settled, Vyra stood amidst the heat haze, trembling not with power, but with restraint. She stared at her own hands, at the veins glowing with a terrifying luminous energy. She had stood on the precipice. She had looked into the abyss of total power, where enemies are ash and problems are solved by incineration. And she had stepped back. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. The instinct to burn was biological, a roar in her blood that demanded release. But she forced it down, locking the dragon behind the bars of her will. She realized then, with a clarity sharper than any diamond, that power without self-control was not authority. It was just another cage. If she burned Voss, if she burned the vault, she would be exactly the monster he claimed she was. Vyra. Ethan's voice cut through the roaring in her ears. He was still slumped against the console, his face the color of old parchment. The wound in his shoulder was cauterized, but he was losing strength fast. Yet, his eyes were focused, pinned on the holographic interface of the core. "I am here," Vyra said, kneeling beside him. Her voice was steady, stripped of the royal vibrato, raw and human. "We have to desynchronize the waveform," Ethan rasped, his fingers flying over the keypad with clumsy determination. "The core is expecting a command to fire, and we have to tell it to sleep. But it doesn't speak binary. It speaks dragon," Vyra finished. "It speaks intent," Ethan corrected. "It needs a lullaby." He grabbed a cable from his belt, a workshop diagnostic link, and jammed it into the console, then slapped the induction pad onto his own temple. "I will handle the code," Ethan said, gritting his teeth as the connection flared. "You handle the song. You have to guide the frequency. Sing to it, Vyra, not with your voice, with your mind." Vyra placed her hands on the interface. She closed her eyes. She reached out with her thoughts, finding the consciousness of the weapon. It felt like touching a storm. It was angry, confused, and hungry. She didn't try to dominate it. She didn't order it to stop. Instead, she offered it a memory. She thought of the cold quiet of the Kestrel workshop. She thought of the way Ethan's hands felt on the hull of a broken ship, gentle, repairing, making things whole. She projected the feeling of warmth instead of fire. The angry pulsing of the core began to slow. The violet light deepened, cooling to a sullen blue. "It is working," Ethan whispered. "The cascade is reversing." But the universe, having a cruel sense of dramatic timing, did not allow them that victory. "Not yet!" a voice screamed from the shadows. Vyra's eyes snapped open. Regent Kale Voss dragged himself out of the debris at the edge of the platform. He was not dead. The blast Vyra had unleashed in her moment of grief had struck his personal shield generator, a piece of illicit pale choir tech that had absorbed the fatal blow but shattered in the process. He looked ruined. His immaculate robes were shredded, his armor fused to his skin in places, and half his face was scorched. But he was alive, and he was not alone. From the dark recesses of the temple entrance, a dozen figures emerged, the remnants of the pale choir unit, those who hadn't fled when the contract was canceled, the fanatics who realized that if they left no witnesses, they could still claim the prize. "Secure the asset," Voss shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the core. "Kill the mechanic. Force the queen to finish the ritual." The mercenaries raised their weapons. Vyra stood up. She placed herself between Ethan and the guns. She did not raise her hands. She did not summon her flames. She simply looked at them. "You want to see strength?" Vyra asked, her voice calm, amplified by the acoustics of the vault so that it sounded like thunder trapped in a bottle. "You want me to prove I am strong enough to rule?" Voss limped forward, a vibro blade in his hand. Burn them, he taunted, his eyes wide with madness. Do it, Vira, show them what you are, incinerate us all, prove you have the stomach for it. He wanted her to do it. Vira realized it with a jolt of pity. He wanted her to become the villain so he could die a martyr, or at least die justified in his belief that power was the only truth. No, Vera said. She turned to the console, but she didn't touch the firing mechanism. She touched the communications array. Ethan, she said softly, can you patch the core's output into the global comms grid? Ethan looked up, pain clouding his eyes, but he understood instantly. I can patch it into every screen from here to the outer rim, he said. Do it. Ethan tapped a command. Vira turned back to Voss. I am not going to burn you. Kale, she said, using his given name. That would be too easy, and it would be too quiet. Above them, the holographic emitters of the temple, designed to broadcast royal decrees to the masses, flared to life. But they didn't just light up the room. The signal punched through the atmosphere, bouncing off the orbital satellites, overriding the Senate feeds, the news networks, the military tactical displays. Billions of faces turned to their screens. And they saw the Dragonheart Vault. They saw the ruin. They saw their queen standing unarmed before a squad of mercenaries. And they saw Regent Voss, scorched and raving, holding a knife. Citizens of the Ardent Empire. Vira spoke, looking not at Voss, but into the sensor eye of the console. You have been told that I am unstable. You have been told that I am weak because I refuse to wage a war of conquest. She gestured to the air, and Ethan, brilliant, quick-thinking Ethan, fed the data from the stolen ledger into the broadcast. Documents floated in the air around her, magnified for the galaxy to see. Here is the truth, Vira said. Here are the signatures of Regent Voss selling your sons and daughters to the Pale Choir. Here are the forged warrants he used to arrest General Thorne. Here are the orders to sabotage my fleet to manufacture a crisis. Voss stared at the holograms floating around him, his secrets, stripped naked. Turn it off, he screamed, slashing at the intangible light. Stop it. I will not stop, Vira said. I will not hide. I am Vira Ardent, and I rule by consent, not by terror. She looked at the mercenaries. And you, she said, the entire galaxy is watching you. If you fire those weapons, there will be no shadow dark enough to hide you. The contract is void. The lead mercenary lowered his rifle. He looked at the broadcast, then at Voss. He realized the paycheck was dead. Voss looked around, realizing he was losing control. The narrative he had carefully crafted, the Mad Queen, the hero regent, was dissolving in real time. You think words will save you? Voss snarled. You are nothing without your fire. He lunged. He didn't care about the cameras, then he just wanted to silence the truth. Vera didn't move. She didn't need to. A bolt of kinetic energy slammed into Voss's chest, knocking him backward onto the stone. It hadn't come from Vira. It had come from the doorway. Captain Suri stood there, flanked by a squad of royal guards, not Voss's men, but the loyalists who had been liberated from the brig when the truth hit the network. Regent Kale Voss, Suri said, her voice shaking with rage. You are under arrest for high treason. Voss scrambled backward, looking for an exit, looking for an ally. But his own mercenaries stepped back, weapons lowered. The Pale Choir had no loyalty to a compromised asset. It is over, Vira said. But it wasn't. A deep, sickening groan vibrated through the floor plates. The core, the interruption, the spike in adrenaline, the fluctuating intent. It had damaged the stabilization cycle. The violet light turned a sickly, bruised green. Gravity in the chamber lurched. Small rocks began to float upward. The lava in the pit below rose in a reverse waterfall. defying physics. "Ethan!" Vira yelled, grabbing the console to keep from floating away. "What is happening?" "The failsafe is cracked," Ethan shouted over the roar of distorting space. The emotional variance was too high. "It is destabilizing. It is going to breach." If it breached, the explosion wouldn't just be physical, and it would be a subspace rupture. It would rewrite the molecular structure of the entire hemisphere. "How do we stop it?" Vira demanded. "We can't stop it with code," Ethan said, frantically typing. "It's too far gone. We have to seal it manually." He looked at her, and for the first time, Vira saw true fear in his eyes. "We have to bond the key permanently," he said. "We have to fuse the physical latch with the energy matrix." "Do it," Vira said. "Vira, listen to me." Ethan grabbed her shoulders. To fuse the key, the anchor has to pour their entire neural pattern into the lock. It requires a total synaptic dump. What does that mean? "It means it will burn the pathways," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "It will wipe the hard drive. Vira, I will lose things, memories, time." He looked at her, tears tracking through the soot on his face. "I might lose us." Vera froze. The cost of the shutdown was the very thing they had fought to save. If he saved the world, he would forget why he wanted to save it. He would look at her and see a stranger. "No," she whispered. "There has to be another way." "There isn't. The gravity is collapsing." "Then I will do it," Vira said. "You can't. You are the blood source. If you try to become the anchor too, the feedback will kill you instantly. It has to be me." He reached for the key, his hand trembling. "I am ready," he said. "It is a fair trade. You get to be queen. The galaxy gets to live. I just lose the context." He tried to smile, but it was heartbreaking. "Tell me the jokes again, okay? Afterward, if I don't remember them." He moved to slam the key into the final lock. Vira caught his wrist. "No," she said fiercely. "Vira, let go. I will not let you sacrifice yourself for me again," Vira shouted. "You left me once to save me, and it broke us. I will not let you erase yourself to save my kingdom." She stepped in closer, wrapping her hand around his, pressing his palm against the key. "We share the cost," she said. "That is not how it works." Ethan yelled, "Make it work!" Vira commanded, "You are the engineer, figure it out. We link our neural patterns and we bridge the load. We take the hit together." Ethan stared at her. It was madness. It was scientifically impossible. It was exactly the kind of reckless, beautiful thing they would do. "It might kill us both," he whispered. "Or," Vira said, leaning her forehead against his, "it might be the only thing that saves us. I will not survive as a queen if I cannot be human with you. If you burn, I burn." The gravity screeched. The light from the core was blinding. "Together." Ethan breathed. "Together." They slammed their joined hands down onto the locking mechanism. The world turned white. There was no pain, only a sensation of rushing wind. Vera felt herself being pulled out of her body, drawn into a vast, crystalline network of light. She was not a dragon. She was not a queen. She was a single note in a deafening song. And she felt Ethan. He was there, beside her in the light. She felt his fear, his brilliant, chaotic mind, his love for the smell of grease and the sound of rain. She felt the memories he was trying to protect, the way the sun hit the workshop floor, the taste of cheap coffee, the first time he saw her smile. The core tried to consume them, and it tried to eat the memories to fuel the shutdown. Vera fought back. She didn't fight with fire. She fought with gravity. She held on to him. She wrapped her soul around his, shielding his mind with hers. "You will not take him," she screamed into the void. He is mine. The core bucked, it roared, and then, faced with a bond it could not consume and could not break, it yielded. The light collapsed. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Vera opened her eyes. She was lying on the cold stone of the temple floor. The magma pit was dark. The core was a dull gray sphere, dormant and cold. Ethan lay beside her. He was still. "Ethan," Vera whispered. Her voice was a terrified croak. She scrambled over to him. She placed her hand on his chest. His heart was beating slow but steady. "Ethan, please." His eyelids fluttered. He groaned, shifting his weight. He opened his eyes. They were unfocused, hazy. He looked at the ceiling. Then he looked at Vera. He stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. There was no recognition in his gaze. It was the blank stare of a stranger. Vera's heart stopped. It had happened. He was gone. "Ethan," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Do you know me?" Ethan blinked. He frowned. He reached up and touched the scales on her cheek. "You are," he mumbled. "Yes?" Vera sobbed. "You are very shiny," he whispered. Vera froze, and he continued, a slow, lopsided grin spreading across his face. "You still owe me 10 minutes. Vera let out a sound that was half laugh, half scream. She buried her face in his neck, holding him tight enough to crack ribs. He remembered. They were battered, they were exhausted, but they were whole. The aftermath of the Dragonheart incident, as the historians would later call it, was less a cleanup and more a renaissance. With Voss's confession broadcast to the galaxy, the conspiracy crumbled. The Senate, terrified of the public's wrath, purged the corrupted members within a week. The pale choir retreated into the deep dark, their reputation as peacekeepers shattered. The peace summit resumed. But this time, the terms were different. Vera did not sit on a throne high above the delegates. She sat at a round table, eye level with the ambassadors. She signed the treaty not as a conqueror, but as a coalition partner. And the Kestrel workshop? It was officially designated a royal protectorate, though its internal culture remained defiantly anarchic. 6 weeks later, in the recovery ward of the Imperial Palace, Ethan sat up in bed looking bored. His shoulder was bandaged, and he was surrounded by data pads. "You know," he said as Vera walked in, "this bed rest concept is flawed. I have designed 3 new engine manifolds in my head. I need tools. I need a wrench. You need to heal," Vera said, placing a tray of food on his lap. "And you need to eat." She sat on the edge of the bed. She was wearing simple robes, no crown. She looked younger, lighter. "So," Ethan said, poking at a piece of fruit, "I was thinking about that beach." "The beach?" "The one I accidentally opened a door to, with the purple sand." "Ah," Vera smiled. "The one with 2 moons." "Right," Ethan frowned. "It had 2 moons?" Vera paused. "Yes, 1 silver, 1 green. Don't you remember?" Ethan squinted, searching his memory, and "I remember the sand and the water. But the moons are fuzzy." Vera felt a pang of cold fear. The doctor said there might be fragments missing, small things, the price of the bond. "It is okay," she said softly. "No, it bugs me," Ethan said. "What else did I forget?" Vera took his hand. She rubbed her thumb over his knuckles. "You forgot the punchline to the joke about the warp drive and the chicken." Ethan looked horrified. "That is my best joke. Tell me." Vera leaned in close. She whispered the joke into his ear. Ethan listened, his face blank for a second. Then he burst out laughing. It was a fresh laugh, as if he was hearing it for the first time. "That is terrible," he wheezed. "I love it." Vera smiled, but her eyes were wet. He had forgotten the joke. He had lost pieces of himself in the dark to save them. But as she watched him laugh, she realized the lesson. Memories were static. They were archives. Love wasn't an archive. Love was the act of retelling the joke. It was the act of rebuilding the bridge, stone by stone, day by day. "We will make new memories," she said. Ethan stopped laughing. He looked at her, and the love in his eyes was not fragmented. It was whole. "Starting now?" he asked. "Starting now." She agreed. The final image the galaxy saw of their Dragon Queen that year was not of her standing on a pile of conquered skulls, nor of her wreathed in terrifying fire. It was a holographic capture from the balcony of the Citadel. Vera stood looking out over the capital city, where the lights of 1,000 ships moved in peaceful commerce. Beside her stood a human man, wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit that looked suspiciously out of place in a royal palace. He said something to her. She threw her head back and laughed, a sound that was rarely heard in the halls of the Ardent Empire. He reached out and took her hand. She didn't pull away. She squeezed it. Their bond wasn't a treaty anymore. It wasn't a political necessity. It was a choice, messy, brave, and freely made. Vera looked at the horizon, where the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors of fire and gold. She had learned that she could be both the dragon and the woman. She could rule with fire when needed, but she would lead with mercy always. She turned back to Ethan, ready for the next problem, the next adventure, the next repair. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," she said. And together, they walked back inside, leaving the door open.